Hello and welcome to the Midnight Choir, a show about harrowing things. How are you doing, Chris?
Oh, heavy, man. So heavy.
That's such a dark introduction.
Yeah, well, these are dark times.
It is dark times. Tell me why you're feeling heavy, man.
It's hard to not, it's hard to continue pretending everything is okay.
Right.
When so many people are dying in Gaza, and so many, we are watching it live, right? We're, like you were saying earlier, we're seeing it on TikTok, we're seeing it on Instagram, we're seeing the people themselves share these videos, and I can't look away, and I'm so tired. I feel just a deep sense of shame that our country that our government has essentially supported this the entire time. And, there may have been some criticism towards Israel or some words of condolence for the people of Gaza, but there's just words, man, and it's our actions that speak louder than anything else. And we have not done anything to stop the violence. Canada's starting to inch towards sort of doing something about it, but I find it extremely, I'm just really disappointed in a lot of myself and a lot of people for just kind of sitting on our hands and not holding our government's feet to the fire on this.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. It's a huge tragedy, and we're not trying to diminish the death that occurred on.
No, what happened on October 7th was terrible, and it was awful.
But it does not, that doesn't justify 30,000 people being killed, the starvation of how many people live in Gaza?
There are 2.2 million people in Gaza.
It doesn't justify the starvation of 2.2 million.
70% of the population of Gaza right now is at a catastrophic hunger level.
Yeah.
And when you bring food in and people haven't seen food in days or weeks or whatever, and they run to the trucks and they get gunned down by soldiers, what the fuck are we doing, And when there are Israeli citizens, as much as there is always an implication that Gazans support Hamas, and Gazans, when you poll Gazans, they have all these terrible opinions about Israelis, and I'm not minimizing that, and I'm not saying
we can't minimize that. It's bad,
but there are Israeli citizens actively working to keep food aid trucks out of Gaza. Two wrongs doesn't make a right, and
No, it's a
and
cycle.
the occupation since 48 has not been easy on the people of Palestine, who now are basically second-class citizens in their own land.
Yeah.
And they're not even really citizens because they live under military occupation. So, if you're Palestinian, you can get arrested with no charges. You can spend years in prison without ever being charged with a crime or without. So all of which is to say, this is the soul of Canada right now. This is the fight for the soul of Canada. How can our government keep supporting this? And how can we present ourselves as the great peacekeepers of the world when we are supporting what is now pretty clearly genocide or at the very least ethnic cleansing? I'm struggling with that.
Yeah. I guess I haven't heard us being called peacekeepers in a lot of years.
You're right. That's we're going back to the Lester B. Pearson days.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I remember that when I was a kid, that was our reputation when I was a kid.
Yeah,
but I haven't heard that probably since I graduated high school.
I think the last major peacekeeping force was in the Balkans in the early 2000s.
Yeah, that would be when I was a kid.
Yeah, exactly. So after that, we Canada sent their military to Afghanistan, and we send the army to different humanitarian crises. But
for sure.
We're sending weapons to Gaza. That's not, there's, I don't know. I feel like we've crossed a line.
Yeah.
We did, I think, a long time ago, but you can kind of justify it. You can keep living your life. You can keep drinking your coffee and smoking way too much weed or whatever it is that you do. And you can keep pretending, but I can't, man. And this is not there's nothing special about me. I think a lot of people are probably going through the same sort of paralysis.
I don't think you're alone. And
I know people who are trying to get people out of Gaza, and And a friend of a friend of mine is from Israel, and like he lost friends on October 7th, and he's lost friends as recently as a month ago in the war, and even this veteran of the IDF says this is way too far, and he is struggling to cope with the grief he has over losing his friends and the shame he feels over what his government is doing in his name and in the name of his faith, and that scares the shit out of me. Like what's happening right now, and the silence from a lot of people that I used to respect.
Yeah.
So that's a dark opening to the podcast.
Welcome to the Midnight Choir. Yeah, we're talking about tough stuff today, for sure. And that's the reason we're talking about tough stuff is because the media never talks about tough stuff.
Yes.
So we are completely reader funded. We are able to talk about literally anything we want because it's you guys who fund us. It's you guys who support us. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy this, please like it, subscribe to it, give it 5 stars, share it with your friends, because we want this to grow so that people can have a reliable source of media. We are called the Rover because it is the news with legs. We talk about things that are probably going to be subjects forever. Even though it's contemporary, it's today. It's not just about today. It's about tomorrow. It's about the rest of time. It's about humanity and the world, even though it's about Quebec. And I think that's the important thing to remember. We're trying to create something that is open dialogue about challenging issues. And yeah, it's tough to listen to sometimes. Yeah, it's sad sometimes. But like, man, we need your support because we want to talk about real things. So please like, subscribe, share with your friends, because this is something important, I think, and I'd like it to keep going.
Yeah, well, the great advantage of doing this ourselves is that we get to choose how to treat the subject. Often in like commercial radio or at a newspaper, it has to be shorter, it has to be faster, it has to be a little bit sexier. So, there's a lot of flash and not much substance. Whereas here, you've seen me, there's not a ton of flash to me. The mustache, maybe. The mustache is pretty flashy. You can probably hear the mustache on the podcast, the bristles. But other than that, like all we have is the substance of our ideas, and I think those can be exciting and those can be fun. And the best part of this is the community. And yeah, you might give a few dollars and help support us. You might not, but if you follow us and ask questions and participate, to me that's the most important thing. If you can give us money, amazing. If you can't, I totally get it, man. I've been broke. I am broke.
Please sign up for the Rover newsletter. It's free. Go to therover.ca/support, SUPPORT-US, US. And listen, you can support, you can sign up for the free newsletter, enjoy yourself. The Rover is focused on human beings. That's what all the articles are about. That's what everything's about. It's always about human beings. So the Rover has been awarded a $10,000 grant in order to do a very special news report, which we're going to dive deep into today because Chris has done reports on this before. Yeah. And it is something that really ties into the fact that we were just talking about police and the fact that we were talking about like the war machine across the globe, because frankly, it is all tied together and is a similar subject. So Chris, can you explain to us why you have been awarded this $10,000 grant?
Well, first off, it's my friend and colleague Hal Newman and I. Hal is like he's like a bloodhound on the paper trail, and he's, if there's something to find, he'll find it, and he'll probably find some extra stuff too. I'm convinced Hal Newman could find Jimmy Hoffa. He's under a football stadium somewhere. Anyways, Jimmy Hoffa joke over Isaac's head. I'll explain later. We got this grant from the Association des journalistes indépendants du Québec. It's a journalism association that Hal and I are a part of. They advocate for independent journalists, and they get a little bit of money from Heritage Canada to explore different subjects. And the subject I chose I pitched them on this. You put together a budget, a pretty detailed plan, your pitch, how you're going to write it, what you're going to do. And in our case, it is the $10,000 will be used on 30 days of reporting inside our court and prison system. And I am really excited about it because it's the kind of subject where you're going to burn a lot of time in the back of a courtroom waiting for something to happen, or at a bail hearing, or at a homeless shelter where so many people end up in prison for bullshit. And and they're a really big chunk of the people bottlenecked in our prison system. They're basically in prison because they're poor.
So let's step back a second before we dive deep into those subject. Where did the genesis of this idea come from?
All right, so there's a few things, but here's here's an example that comes back to me a lot. 2 years ago, I was with my brother-in-law Bez, and we went to a homeless encampment to talk to people and see what was going on. And I ran into this guy I know, Shane. I've known Shane for, I guess, 10 years. Shane had been on the streets most of his adult life. He was living in this encampment for some time. And the day that I ran into him, he had just gotten keys to an apartment. He was so happy. And he was leaving to meet up with his girlfriend. They were going to take possession of this new apartment. She had just found a job. She was going to work at getting her kids back from youth protection. And, Shane was going to straighten his life too. And I was so happy for him. And then 6 months later, he was back in jail. And that's a big reason, to see these people struggle and almost make it out and then just get pulled back in again and again. And
so seeing this from people you love, people you've covered, this is kind of what inspired you to want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in privilege, but we never wanted for anything, and Christ, we went skiing on the weekends sometimes.
Right,
but
yeah.
I worked in construction for a long time, and you work among people who've done time. You work among one of the guys I was really close with died of an overdose, and he was he had kind of gotten into the criminal life as we drifted apart. And you see this person, and I remember this guy who died. His name was Frank. I remember feeling okay, he's so close. If you could just catch a break, if you could just catch a break and break the cycle of violence that's kind of led him, his dad had beaten him up when he was a kid, and it wasn't easy for him. So you think, all right, well, if he can break this cycle, then I knew his daughter, I knew his wife, he was a great guy, but he was a troubled guy, and he never made it out. And you don't see enough of these stories in the paper, or when you do, these people are treated like accessories, to your story, and not like real people. And I just, I see this big, giant, oppressive machine, and I think we need to figure out, how to do it better. And none of this addresses the fact that, Indigenous and Black and Arabic and people of color are all disproportionately snatched up by the system. I think Indigenous women account for 3% of the women in Canada, but they're about half of the women in custody and incarcerated in our prisons. You can't it's such a big subject to tackle, right? With very little guarantee that you're going to get behind, you're going to get the goods you need to make a good story, that you do sort of need a good 30 days of trial and error to get the right people on board. And I think we're going to do well. I think with Hal working on the paper trail, and I have a lot of relationships within the judicial system already. I think we can make something really interesting. And one of the coolest parts of this that I didn't mention is we're going to be producing this alongside L'Actualité magazine. So the Rover started with this telephone, a Toyota Yaris, and me. Not super impressive. Now we're working with the biggest French language news magazine outside of France, L'Actualité, which is, their editors are so fucking cool and they're so nice. And they agreed when we put our application in, they agreed to publish what we did no matter what. So it's going to be published in French and in English at the same time. And
when?
That's a good question. Probably in about 6 months. Because with a magazine, you need to give them runway, right? They need to.
Magazines are a little different on the timeline.
Yeah, they need to set aside a ton of space for your. We've been able to squeeze things faster now and then, but that's because a story dropped or a story, So probably months from now, because we really need to take that deep dive. It'll take a long time to report, a long time to write, and then when we're done, it's kind of up to them when it happens, and that's their right, because I don't think we would have gotten this grant were it not for L'Actualité believing in us and telling us the grant existed. So like I am very grateful to them.
Can you tell me a little bit about the demographics of prison?
I don't have the exact statistics for men's prisons, but Indigenous people are way overrepresented in the system. And I mean, like, it's the continuation of like, okay, well, there was residential school, right? And then after residential school, there was the 60s scoop, where people were taken away from their forcefully adopted away from their parents. You have people like Nakuset in Montreal, who is the head of the the Native Women's Shelter. She was part of the 60s scoop. She was adopted out of her Cree family in Saskatchewan and into a Jewish family in Montreal. And this across Canada produced a ton of harm. And even though it stopped, these policies continued with like, youth protection. Indigenous kids in the youth protection system are way overrepresented. There are more Indigenous kids in the youth protection system in foster care today than there were kids in federal custody during the residential school crisis or era. So these are continuing. And then what do you think happens when a kid has been in the foster care system their whole life? There's almost certainly been abuse in the foster care system. That's something that happens a lot. There's a ton of emotions to deal with. You don't have wealth or any kind of tools to help yourself out. You age out of the system at 18 or 19 years old. Where do you think you're going to end up? Like, probably either on the street or in prison. I mean, a lot of people are skilled enough and have the kind of determination to work their way out, but you're starting at such a disadvantage. So yeah, the demographic makeup in Canada is way disproportionately Indigenous people, people of color, and that too is a huge part of like why we want to do this. I think we need to right these wrongs, and we need to be on top of this, because like I've said, I think 3 times already, like this is one of those issues that speaks to who we are as a people and what our values are. And these are things, you may not directly be involved as a citizen in what's happening to these people because it's the government, but like it is kind of being done in our name. It's a weird thing, right? Democracy, like we have a responsibility to speak out, but it's hard. We have our lives, we have to feed our kids, we have to survive. And so that $10,000, that's how we do what we do, right? Like we get that money so that we can go to that painful place. And until we get that money, we can't, because, well, we also have to survive. So I get it. Like, we're being paid to investigate this. A lot of people aren't. So it's hard to take your own limited free time and pour it into this thing that you're unsure about. So we're going to try and do that for you.
It's very nebulous when you're not involved in it. Like you don't really have any association with it, essentially. Like,
if you don't know anyone who's been inside, like,
that's it. Like,
all you know about prison is what you see on TV.
That's it. Yeah. The most you're going to get is from media,
and it's generally American prison, and it's not exactly
which is not the same
as here. And
yeah. Now, with the judicial system, is it beyond the prisons, the courts? Is there a crisis in there? Is there a problem?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great. Thank you. Huge backlog in cases. Access to there's not enough judges, right? So things just bottleneck. And then in addition, there is a huge crisis. Like, we all in Canada, just as they do in the United States, we all have the right to to a fair trial. And many of us, probably most of us, could never afford to go to trial with a lawyer and whatever. Never mind if you're unhoused or you're in a terrible crisis. So we have a legal aid system that's supposed to mitigate against that. But the way that legal aid works in Quebec, lawyers in general get a flat fee for each case they take. And it's only I think it's like $600 or it's a laughably small amount of money.
For a day? For
total. You're getting $600 to handle this case. So what do you think the motivation is when you get $600 to handle a case? You get it off your plate, right? So, and how do you get a plate? How do you get a case off your plate? You plead guilty. So we want to know how many people out there are pleading guilty when in fact they could fight this and win it in court? How many people are just taking a deal because they can't afford to not take a deal, and if they go to court, they can end up with an even worse punishment if they fuck it up. So that too is a gigantic problem in our system, and it feeds the overcrowding in prison problem, which is another the biggest provincial prison in Quebec. Bordeaux, I think there are more suicides in that prison than any other provincial prison in Canada. A study that looked at data between roughly 2010 and 2019 or 2015 found that there were more suicides in Quebec prisons than there are in any province across Canada. And I think Ontario has almost twice the amount because they're a much larger province. They have a much larger prison system and they have fewer suicides. So there's something wrong at so many different levels of the process, and it starts with legal aid, and it starts with how your level of wealth decides, and your level of privilege decides how the justice system is going to work for you, right?
There are a bunch of court personnel literally just quitting and leaving the court system. Why is that? Because you didn't mention that while you were talking just now, but one of the biggest reasons for the crisis is literally just an exodus from the judicial system. Why?
Okay, well, everyone's overworked, right?
Yeah, similar to the medical system, I assume.
Everyone's under a ton of stress.
Okay.
And you keep seeing the same outcomes. Like it is like you talk to people who like the only big advantage of working in the provincial court system is that you have access to, I believe, a good pension when you retire, and you have like decent benefits when you're on the job, but it doesn't pay very well, and you are stuck in this big giant broken machine, and it must be demoralizing, especially like if you're a lawyer or something, and you see your colleagues from law school working in the private sector, probably making twice what you do, overcrowded, underpaid, and it's discouraging work. It's just like you're not seeing a ton of great outcomes in the judicial system. It's a brutal, like even the good actors inside the system especially the good actors have a very hard time, because it forces you to kind of mute the part of your brain that's saying this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and these are all guesses. But at the end of the day, it's money and it's working conditions, and both of those are really bad. Until the Jordan ruling, which was a Supreme Court ruling a few years back that determined between the time you are charged with a crime, you have to have your trial within 18 months, I believe. That creates problems too, because a bunch of people now are basically, that 18-month period is violated, and then they have to be released. So the court is undergoing a really hard time, probably the hardest time in its recent history. And to me, there's no better time to be looking into it and seeing exactly what's going wrong, exactly what we can help, and who are the good actors inside the system who are trying to change it and who are trying to make it better.
What is recidivism? You said that word.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure half, if not more, of the audience will not have any idea what that is.
Good question. Recidivism is when you commit a crime. Like you've committed a crime and you've been released from prison. You commit another crime. You are a recidivist. Okay. And we have a very high recidivism rate.
So it's returning to jail.
Returning to jail.
Okay. Why do you think recidivism rates are so high in Quebec specifically?
Okay. Our provincial prisons are super overcrowded.
Okay.
If you look at Bordeaux, I believe they have one part-time psychologist for 1,000 inmates. So you're not getting treatment. You're not getting anything close to treatment. Our prison, and Bordeaux is an extremely violent prison. I was once sent a video that I chose to investigate about, the video just depicts someone being stabbed by two people repeatedly and slashed and beaten, and how do you get out of there and become a normal person? If our goal is to heal someone, and beating the shit out of them or doing nothing as they get assaulted like that, and there are plenty of stories of guards going overboard. There was at Christmas a year and a half ago, there was a young black man who was supposed to be released. He was kept in an extra day in prison because they have such bad staffing problems. And during an altercation with a guard, they put a spit mask over his face and he choked to death. It's these conditions, this violence, and this and above all, and this lack of access to mental health resources you're in a cage for 23 hours a day. At one point, I believe a quarter of the prison staff was sick or missing. So you can't operate a prison at 100% capacity with 3/4 of the staff you need, given that like there are safety regulations in place for staff and prisoners, and it's dangerous to, have everybody roaming around all day when there's not enough staff. Sure. Yeah. There was an extended period of time where people were basically in solitary confinement constantly, or 3 to a 2-person bunk. Those are conditions that don't make it easy. And the overarching theme in all of this is that there are no rehabilitation programs in provincial prison. You're in for too short a time to have access to a program that might help you deal with your anger, help you accept the fact that, there is something you need to change in your life, help you get sober. Because as hard as it is to access help, it's extremely easy to access illicit drugs. Like that keeps going in. People smuggle in drugs all the time to prison. So we've created this small, brutal place where people learn to become more brutal or they die. And I don't think that's going to make better citizens. And that certainly doesn't make, Quebec a safer place.
What are some actual applicable solutions that the government and the system could put into place in order to fix these problems? Because we're talking about the problem itself, but there needs to be some sort of solution that somebody can propose. So what would those be?
They're all over the board. For starters, a good chunk of your prison system is people who are either on the cusp of homelessness or homeless. Fix poverty and you fixed a good chunk of the crime that's going on. So it might sound flippant or it might sound like this liberal bullshit, but social housing, access to mental health, these are things that would help. Here's a way that Quebec was not helpful at all, and it could have been helpful in the whole crisis to prison pipeline. A couple years back, the federal government passed something called Bill C-92. Bill C-92 takes the authority over youth protection away from the provinces. In the case of First Nations and Indigenous peoples, C-92 takes the responsibility of youth protection away from provinces and gives them back to these First Nations and these Indigenous communities, because that's a recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If a community can keep one of the kids, like if a kid is either being abused or neglected by their parent, and you just ship them off to the foster care system, you're not going to fix anything. And if you surround them with white kids, they're gonna undergo an incredible culture shock that is not easy to deal with at all. So if you can keep these kids in community, and if you can keep these kids in a loving and safe and culturally appropriate environment where they can still learn their language, where they can still practice the traditions that have kept their community unique in itself for time immemorial. If you can, that's a huge solution. And what Quebec did when the government passed C-92, they sued the government. They said, no, we want to keep authority over our Indigenous people. And in court, they argued that Indigenous people aren't competent enough to deal with their own kids, that they don't have the constitutional authority to deal with their own kids, and that if we were to award Indigenous people control of their own youth protection system, then who's to say we don't award them control of their own natural resources? Yeah, so it's all about fucking money, right? It's all about money, and it's so discouraging. So, what I mean here is we could get out of our own way sometimes, and that would help. So, social housing, not forcing Indigenous kids into a brutal fucking youth protection system. These are different things we can do to help make it better. Another thing, fewer cops on the street. That might sound counterproductive. It might sound like crime would explode. The more cops you have, the more arrests you have.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And Montreal's police budget is ballooning every year more and more.
Yeah.
And more.
And they never respect the budget. No, and they're never punished for going over budget. They're always just given.
They're rewarded. Money. They're rewarded for it.
That might be the biggest problem.
It's probably the biggest problem.
To a man with a hammer, every fucking problem looks like a nail. And when you have a cop out there on the street, he's not going to be like, oh, how can I social work this person? No, he has a gun and handcuffs, or she has a gun and handcuffs, and that's the tools that they use. And you can give them all the mental health training in the world, and they can be the kindest people in the world. In the end, your boss wants you to do
Arrest.
something, and that something is generally
Yeah.
arresting people.
Yeah. Toronto has the same problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's all over North America.
What about solutions for the actual court systems? Because you're right. There's long-term solutions in individuals' lives, but the court system right now needs help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some solutions there?
Some years back, the court system was reformed to where you can't go to prison if you don't, like, if you're like a homeless person and you don't pay your fines. Homeless people are so over. It's not even. This isn't even incarceration. This is like you get a fine for loitering, right? You're sleeping on the metro. You're doing. One homeless person they showed me they got a fine for swearing loudly. Yeah, I didn't realize this was like a bylaw infraction because like.
What?
We're like, when you get a bylaw infraction like that, you're not going through you're not going through the judicial system, you're going through the court system. Like you're going through like a more administrative, like parking ticket kind of court system. So that too, right? Like if we didn't target homeless people as much, I believe the unhoused account for something like 40-50% of the tickets, the bylaw infractions that police write.
We should adjust them. Your ticket is proportional based on your salary.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, it's like
My friend said that yesterday.
that's crazy. That's a crazy idea. In the same way,
Imagine,
that, like,
because then, like, my friend literally said this to me yesterday while we were walking to Dairy Queen.
so if you're a billionaire and you get a ticket,
You have, but doesn't that make sense? Because
that's
suddenly,
insane. I love it.
Because imagine certain people who are involved in both our lives, very wealthy person, and
Our landlord, yeah.
yeah. Well, we didn't need to say that. I mean, I don't care. He's not listening.
You never know.
But
But he doesn't use text messaging, so I don't think he's.
No, I
listening
don't.
to
He
this.
doesn't. He has a flip phone. The man cannot listen to a podcast.
No.
Probably has never listened to a song of music.
I don't
want
wanna
to
say shit,
Found
'cause I'm
joy
trying
in
to-
his life. But
I have to deal with him a lot because he's
Yeah, I know,
like,
yeah.
we're gonna move away. So,
I know.
but-
Imagine, you and I get a ticket, and me and my, less than $14,000 a year. They're like, well, you got to pay this much percentage.
$6.
Yeah, I'd be like, sure,
Here's 75 cents.
I will pay you that. And then like he would have to pay, God knows how much.
I like this a
but like
lot.
it would literally stop rich people from.
Well, if you have to think, okay, do I?
And it would probably
want to
curb
pay
this.
$10,000 because I parked in my car in the wrong
Exactly, but
place.
it would probably actually curb this problem. It literally would, because they wouldn't go just to poor people. They would probably actually target rich motherfuckers.
assuming this could get by the Supreme Court, assuming this isn't a giant violation of people's civil rights.
Why would it be? Just say it's a tax.
Yeah.
How about there's a baseline ticket price plus a tax based on your income?
Did you come up with this?
No, my friend did yesterday.
No, but I mean,
I'm sure she didn't come up with it yesterday, and she is listening, by the way. I just think, imagine like a tax on top of it. So like, because taxes are based on proportional income. So like,
Yes, they are.
Okay, so baseline, you got a parking ticket. It's baseline $100.
The richer you are, the less you pay because you know how to get around. No.
Yeah, exactly. So like, there'd probably be some tax loophole or something like that.
Yeah.
You like donate to a charity, and your ticket is less expensive. But like, so you're priced. It's $100 for your parking ticket, and then plus 1% of your total income.
That's amazing.
You'd stop it.
It's never gonna happen, but
It'll never happen. Well, no. Do you know how many lobbyists there would be against that?
Oh God.
What is your final objective with this project? So we just discussed the major problems, the dysfunction of the court system. So what do you want the result of your project to be? I assume
question.
there's got to be a goal.
Reform. Reform, and like for all of the bluster about journalism, democracy, whatever, generally our job is to just get the information out there and people do with it what they can. But occasionally, if you uncover something shameful enough, politicians can be shamed into doing the right thing. All we need is that pressure, and the way that we get that pressure is by getting the information out to as many people as possible in the most persuasive way that we can. And I believe the most persuasive tool that we have often is good, humane, empathetic journalism. Years ago, when half of City Hall was like on trial for corruption, one of I believe it was the trial of Lino Zambito. No, it wasn't Lino Zambito. It was another. Anyways, it was a high-ranking city official, and the former city manager, and he was acquitted in the end. And a bunch of maybe sort of mafia-connected construction people, and they're all on they're all on trial and together. So they're all in the courtroom together, and these guys are dressed immaculately. They're joking around. They're having a good time. They're on their iPads pretending. They're like looking at court notes. They're like clearly playing solitaire or fucking Angry Birds or whatever. And it's like a serious and interesting case. I was replacing our like the Montreal Gazette's like super corruption reporter. Linda Goulai is an insanely good. So I was replacing Linda Goulai for a few days, and then I had to go back to the court the following week to cover bail hearings. And I spent a morning doing that, and then at lunch I sit in like the big, there's like a big atrium in the courthouse, and I sit next to one of the guys who was on trial for corruption. And he's like, "Hey, you're the Gazette guy. Like, hey, you wrote a good article. You weren't too hard on us." I was like, "Oh, thanks a lot, man." He's like, "Where's Linda Goulai? I miss Linda." And super nice guy, really chill guy, and like I realized like he's just having a good time. That's it. His experience in the court system is like, sure, he had to pay an arm and a leg to get good legal defense, but he has the money. So he has the money. He has a really enjoyable experience. We had a super nice conversation about local politics. He's a really nice guy. He's having a great old time. And then, and then I go back to the bail hearings for the afternoon, and it's just more misery. So yeah, that's like when you have money in the court system, like your experience is vastly different, and your odds of being acquitted are great too, because the other kind of curse of all of this is that we've made incarceration so easy and such a foregone conclusion that cops have forgotten how to do their jobs, the investigative part of their jobs. Because it's like, there have been cases, and I'm not making this up, there have been cases where cops have made up evidence to get a search warrant, or it was later revealed that they made up evidence and the conviction stood anyways. Like, this shit happens all the time. And the reason the cops are not good at their jobs is because we've made them, well, beyond the fact that I think the institution is wrong, we've made their jobs way too easy, in the sense that like, yeah, just arrest this guy on a drug charge, get him in.
And we just hire just endless people who have no business being cops.
Yeah, and I think just just think policing is an institution that will find reasons to put people in prison. Like that's why they exist. It's not so much the individual's fault as it is the system's. I
liked your solutions, by the way. I don't want to be the kind of people who, because like the conservatives,
just burn it down. And
the conservatives are all about that. They always present viable problems, I think. And then they're just angry, but there's no solution. They're like, we have a problem. Okay, well, what's a better solution?
A great success of Pierre Poilievre is that he has rightly identified that there are many problems with the institutions in Canada.
Yes.
Everything does sort of feel broken. And I get that. And that's an effective message. Of course, his solution to it would only make things worse.
He doesn't offer solutions.
You're right. Well, because then you can attack a solution, but you can't attack like an assertion, oh, everything's broken. Like, it's hard to, what are you going to say? No, everything's not broken. It takes you a year to get a passport. You're you can't buy a house.
You can't go to the hospital.
You can't go to the hospital. Yeah.
It's broken.
But his solutions only, concentrate wealth and they probably will make things better if you're at the top, but not if you're like us. And I just noticed you have that Frankie Goes to Hollywood album on the wall.
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah. Pleasure Dome. Welcome.
Yeah, it's great, dude.
Great album.
I just love the cover as well. Anyways, do you have any final closing statements about what you're working on, about this project, and about the judicial system? Anything you'd like.
Okay, so final statement would actually be a warning, which is that because we're going to be we're going to fuck you up. So. I have a few things on my plate right now that I'm working on for stories, but there will be fewer me stories in the Rover for a while. That's like fine. I might write columns, and I'm definitely going to keep doing this, and I'm going to update you guys on how the project's going, but this is going to require all of my attention. And the reason, but ordinarily this would worry me because it would mean we're not going to be producing content. Because we get the grant, I no longer have to rely on the Rover to pay my rent. I can use the grant to pay my rent, and the money that I would have used to pay my rent, I can pay contributors with. So what it means is you're probably going to see more diverse contributors. You're probably going to see new voices. That's really cool. You'll see mine. You'll read me a little bit less, but it's good to miss the people that we love. And hopefully you do love it. And me, I need it. So that's my big warning. And but I'm so excited about the podcast. I think we're going to get like I have two really cool guests lined up, I think, and I'm not going to say their names because I don't want to like.
No, you'll see it when it happens.
But I think we have two really cool
Yeah.
cool guests, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And you know, as always, reach out to Isaac, reach out to me. Our information will be in the
in the description.
In the description.
Everything's in the description.
And you know, Savannah's coming back from Europe in a while, our managing editor, so she'll probably join us. And things are like moving in a great direction for the Rover right now. And I'm so fucking pumped that you guys are on board. We're gonna do good things.
Yeah, let's do good things, and you'll still hear Chris every week on the podcast. So,
proof of life.
Yeah, he'll be.
I'll
alive.
even have like a newspaper for the video. Like, this is today's paper. I'm still alive.
Please, if you feel like supporting us, therover.ca/support-us.
And even just following us for free, even just subscribing to the YouTube channel, leaving a 5-star review.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify.
Tell your
on
friends.
Apple Music, or on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. That's what it is. Please tell your friends about it. Post about it. There'll be lots of reels and stuff you can share online. And we love doing this, and we want people to discuss and talk about things because there's really so little good deep dives into serious matters. You know, there's lots of news coverage, basic news coverage from like CBC and stuff like that, overviews, but we're deep diving into stuff, and that's what it's going to keep being. And we're going to have interviews with guests and deep diving into stuff. So please follow, get the free newsletter, pay for the newsletter if you want, YouTube, everywhere.
Fuck a day.
Thank you so much, guys.
Isaac, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.